Hi, this is Kelsey Cooper, and I'm the host for Disabled Birth Stories podcast. I hope those in the disabled community can enjoy these stories of bringing beautiful babies into the world and the journey along the way. I hope this podcast helps you feel seen, heard, empowered, and capable, no matter your journey to being a parent. I hope those who are able-bodied would listen to empathize with and support their disabled family member, friend, acquaintance, or random stranger. Thank you for listening, and feel free to email me if you have any questions or would like to be featured on the podcast at disabledbirthstories@gmail.com. Thanks for joining us today. After listening to this episode, please remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Please also check the description for our social media links and the link to our merch store. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. Please consult your medical providers for all of your healthcare needs. Also, the views and opinions expressed by the guests are not necessarily the views and opinions of the host and vice versa. Hi, I'm your host, Kelsey Cooper, and I'm here with Alesha, and she's going to tell us her story today. Alesha, can you start by introducing yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Alesha Thomas. I have cerebral palsy spastic diplegia, and I use a wheelchair full-time for mobility. I did walk in a walker up until the point when I was 19, and then I decided to get a baclofen pump, and I went to a very, very large college that was full of hills and uneven terrain, so I decided to start using my chair full-time at that point. I have a son, Nolan, who is 4.5, and I love to share my journey about my pregnancy and parenting.
Can you tell us about anything you want to share about your pregnancy journey or finding out you were pregnant?
So I was really fortunate in that my pregnancy journey was a really good one. I actually felt better being pregnant with CP than I normally do when, of course, I'm not pregnant. And so I found out I was pregnant in August of 2018, and I had prenatal care from the very beginning. I was very fortunate to have the head of maternal fetal medicine at UCSD in San Diego as my maternal fetal medicine physician. And something that was really important to me when I became an adult was finding someone that felt comfortable treating me as a person with a disability being pregnant. So I wanted to make sure before I really started thinking about a family or whatever, was going to happen, that I found somebody that was very comfortable treating me. And so my maternal fetal medicine doctor, Andrew Hull, was fantastic. He was basically, you have CP, I don't care. You can totally have kids. Everything is fine. Because when I was, as I was growing up, there was not really a lot of information about disability in pregnancy or cerebral palsy in pregnancy. And so I'm one of those people that likes to be very, very prepared just in the event that, anything would happen. And so it was very important to me to make sure I had a team that was very pro pregnancy and disability, and I was able to find that. And my pregnancy was really smooth. I was very fit when I got pregnant and had been working out continuously in a neurorehabilitation gym called Challenge Center here in San Diego, California, consistently for 2.5 years before I ended up finding out that I was pregnant. So I felt I was very fortunate in the fact that my body was prepared physically for pregnancy. And I really feel like that helped shape the success of my pregnancy and how good I felt, because I was really strong. Of course, now that I'm a mom, I don't, and with the pandemic, I don't have time to work out in the gym that much. But as far as pre-pregnancy, I'm so glad that I was so physically fit. And yeah, my pregnancy was great up until 36 weeks when I started developing pre-eclampsia. But other than that complication and that side of it, everything was really good.
Is there anything you want to share about pregnancy in general once finding out you were pregnant, the journey of pregnancy and how it affected your body?
Finding out I was pregnant, I was absolutely elated, because from my teen years, I was always told, well, if your cycles are irregular, we think you're going to have a ton of fertility issues. And so when I when I found out, I was very surprised because doctors always told me, oh, we think that one day if you decide to have children, it will be a very challenging journey and that you will probably need a lot of intervention with fertility support and reproductive endocrinology. And that didn't end up being the case. So that I was very fortunate in that regard. And just, I think the biggest thing that I could recommend for people with disabilities that want to become pregnant or are thinking about a family is if you are physically able to work out and try and prepare your body in that way. I think that was the biggest success to my pregnancy journey because my body was as strong as it could be to embark on, carrying a baby and growing a baby and all of those things. So I feel very fortunate in that regard that my body was as ready as it could be. And I honestly can't imagine for myself personally, at least, being a full-time wheelchair user. I can't imagine what it would have been if my body wasn't as prepared. But I just got lucky that at that point I had a lot of time to be working out in the gym and there wasn't a pandemic. So I didn't have to worry about safety in that regard.
You said you saw an MFM from the beginning. Were your appointments pretty much run of the mill, or did they do anything special since you had an MFM? What were your appointments like?
I would say that my appointments were pretty standard. I didn't always have to transfer out of my chair for my ultrasounds and things like that, but my MFM, I said, was the head of the program at UCSD here in San Diego. So, and he also manages a lot of other complicated cases and was the head of the HIV fertility program to help parents that were HIV positive. So to him, having CP was no big deal. He was like, you have CP? Awesome. Let's have a baby. It's not going to be a big issue. So I think that to me was really comforting because I think, especially in my experience in adult medicine, when you have a disability, especially when you have a disability from childhood, all these adult physicians are like, well, we don't know what to do with you. Like, you have kid problems. And so to find a physician that was outside of the disability realm and outside of pediatric care where they're used to, having patients with disabilities all the time, it was really comforting to have someone that was just like, whatever comes our way, we'll figure it out. And I was, apprehensive because I have had high blood pressure genetically since I was 19. So I really wanted to manage that and make sure that was okay. But closer to my second trimester, that's when I went off my blood pressure medication due to safety reasons with the pregnancy. And there can be a lot of interactions, I guess, later in pregnancy with certain blood pressure medications. So we did that. But I also decided from the very beginning to go through genetic counseling and do all of that in the beginning. Because like I said, I'm a big planner. So as soon as I found out I was pregnant, I was like, okay, we're doing this, this, and this. And it was actually really awesome because the genetic counselor that I had was also disabled. So I think when I saw her roll out to call me back, when we started meeting with the genetic counseling team, I almost wanted to cry because it was so nice to see somebody with a disability represented in that field. So that was really cool. Yeah, for the most part, everything was run of the mill, except that because I have a baclofen pump implanted to help manage my spasticity, I found out at 34 weeks that I knew that I was going to have a C-section from the beginning because I just knew that with the strength in my legs and everything like that, like pushing was not going to be a safe option. And so I knew from the very beginning that a C-section was going to be the way to go, which I was fine with. I mean, as someone that has had 13 surgeries to date, I accepted a C-section very early on. And I knew from a young age that when I did become pregnant one day, that a C-section was going to be my safest option for delivery. What I did not know, and the most devastating part of it, was that I found out at 34 weeks that because of my baclofen pump, that they couldn't find an anesthesiologist that was comfortable placing either an epidural or a spinal block because of the catheter that runs, in my back. And so it was decided at 34 weeks that I was going to have to undergo general anesthesia. Obviously, being pregnant, I was absolutely devastated that I was going to have to miss the birth of my son myself. Nobody plans for that. And so that was a very, very hard pill to swallow. But I realized, sometimes, whether you're disabled or you're able-bodied, your birth plan can go out a window very, very quickly. And you just kind of have to, let it go and do whatever is safest in the moment. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to grieve that experience for a extremely long time. I feel like I'm still grappling with the fact that I was not awake for his birth, and he's 4.5. So, that's really hard. And then, so like I said, up until 36 weeks, when my blood pressure started going up and I went in to get checked, and they're like, we think you're pre-eclamptic. They're like, it's not technically an emergency, because an emergency C-section is from like within 5 minutes. And so basically, when I went in at 36 weeks to be checked for my blood pressure, I went in at 3:00 on a Tuesday, and by 7:04 we had a baby. So it was a little bit of a process, but we got there and everybody's safe and healthy. So
getting around and functioning as a wheelchair user, are there things that you wish they could change as far as accessibility?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Even though I was in a very new, more state-of-the-art office, there was only one accessible exam table. So there were two sides to the office. So you have the ultrasound side, and then you have the regular doctor's office side where you meet with your MFM. So on the doctor's office side, they only had one room with an accessible exam table, and that was almost always used for non-stress tests for pregnant moms. And so often they would have to book me in that room if they knew they actually wanted me on an exam table. So that was hard, because on that side, there was only one accessible exam table. That being said, on the ultrasound side, there was a lot more accessible exam tables. And also my doctor's office did not have a scale that could accommodate a wheelchair. So I basically had to weigh myself at the gym every week, and I would keep track of everything for my doctor. And then also, when I went in for my baclofen refills at Rainy Children's Hospital here in San Diego, because they have a lifespan clinic for adults with cerebral palsy, I would also get weighed there. But yes, I definitely wish that every exam table was accessible in every room, and that every doctor's office had a scale that could accommodate wheelchairs. To this day, and especially now that I'm not going to the gym on a weekly basis, the only place I really can get weighed is my physical medicine and rehabilitation office. So I only get weighed like every 3.5 months. And that's if the scales are, accurate and working. For some reason, those scales break down a lot more. But other than that accessibility, I think it was really pretty good. But the whole scales and accessible exam tables is always an issue. I remember this was separate from my pregnancy journey, but I remember going into a doctor's office one time, and one time I went there, they had all accessible exam tables, and then the next time I went there, they were all gone, and I was like, what happened? And they were like, oh, we were renting those exam tables and they were too expensive. So like get rid of them basically. Um, but so I think other than that, it was pretty good, but it was just, it sucks as a person with a disability knowing that you need those things. And even in a doctor's office where they see people with disabilities frequently, you're not always going to have that. I guess you would call it a luxury. Like, it shouldn't be a luxury. But honestly, at this point, like, accessible exam tables and accessible scales are a luxury, which is really unfortunate.
And I know that when we travel and go to different doctor's offices, there's not an accessible scale. So what would an accessible scale, like what do you use at the gym? What do they look like? How are they accessible?
They're accessible so that it's like a flat platform and you basically roll up onto it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, it will take your weight with your wheelchair. And then I just have a sticker on the back of my chair, each of my chairs, because as a side note, I use a manual chair in the house and then I use power chairs out in the community. So I have a sticker on each one of my chairs that has the weight of it so that can be subtracted. But yeah, basically it's just a platform that you roll up on. There are some scales that are semi-accessible that have bars that you can actually hold on to if you're able to stand up, and you can hold on to them without it affecting the weight. But yeah, those are also hard to find because only certain scales do that.
And then I guess going into the 36th week and learning about the C-section, what was going to the hospital like?
So Nolan's dad, Brian, is a nurse and he actually works at the hospital where I delivered. And so everything was really fast. Luckily, that day he was already at work, so he only had to come upstairs. But within a matter of mere minutes, it went from one person being in my room to about 15 to 20 people all talking at me very quickly. And I'm trying to understand, and I'm overwhelmed, and they're starting me on magnesium to help prevent the possibility of stroke. And magnesium makes you feel not great. Definitely being pre-eclamptic, it was hard because this whole time, basically the way I describe being on magnesium to people is imagining that you're extremely intoxicated, almost to the point of blacking out, and you also have the worst flu of your entire life. And on top of that, you're having a C-section and having a baby. So that, the medication obviously didn't hit me right away, but definitely when I woke up from my C-section, I felt a little bit more disoriented. Sadly, I don't remember a lot of that first 24 hours because they keep you on the medication for 24 hours. And, my body was just exhausted. And so going into that, I think the hardest part for me was the fact that, of course, by laws of the universe, my MFM was on his way to Los Angeles to pick up a colleague at the airport when all this was going on. Well, it was a different team of doctors. And so Dr. Hull and I had discussed an entire plan of how everything would go. And that because Brian was a nurse and very accustomed to seeing people in various conditions, the original plan was that he was supposed to be allowed in the operating room, even though I was under general anesthesia, because obviously because of his job, he is able to handle seeing, someone else or myself in that situation. Well, fast forward to, 20 people being in my room very quickly. And they decided in about 5 seconds that they were not comfortable with that. And that was not happening. So then I immediately lose it. Like, I'm absolutely devastated. Nobody plans for both parents of their child to miss the birth. Nobody plans for that. And by the grace of what I feel like is a literal miracle, UCSD has a volunteer doula program. and it's a first come, first serve basis. And obviously, I was emotionally like very upset because, nobody wants this to happen, but I understand that I could only push and advocate so much in this situation. And so, by the grace of the volunteer doula program, 10 minutes before I went into the OR, a volunteer doula, her name was Liz, and I will never forget her for the rest of my life. And Liz, I hope you get to hear this podcast because you made such an impact on me that day. I don't know what I would have done without you. And so they allowed her to go in the operating room, and I was actually able to get her to take pictures and video of the birth since both of us were going to be missing it. And she stayed right by my side until I woke up later that evening. I don't even think I woke up until at least 9 o'clock or something like that because I am very sensitive to anesthesia. So it usually takes me a while to wake up. And I remember she was the first person I saw when I woke up. And I don't think a lot of people talk about the support of a doula during a C-section. But for me, that was the biggest saving grace of a whole situation of a birth plan that literally went out a 10-story window. So to me, that was kind of everything. Is she like helped put the puzzle together, and I got to meet her mere minutes before we went into the OR. And I can't imagine for myself personally if Liz wasn't a part of our journey. And I got so lucky because, like I said, it's a first come, first serve basis. So if the volunteer doula is with somebody else and that person hasn't given birth and isn't like ready to go yet, you're basically out of luck if there's nobody available for you. So I just got really lucky that she was available and very close to the hospital. And I think I even remember her saying, "Oh, my husband decided he had to go into work. So then I was available for you." And that changed everything for us. I mean, obviously, our birth situation was less than ideal. Nobody wants that to happen. But, obviously, the first and foremost priority is the safety of myself and my child. So that had to come first. But yeah, shout out to the volunteer doula program at UCSC because it is only because of that I have record of my son's births.
So you said that it took a while to wake up, and what was the immediate postpartum in the hospital like?
To be honest, like I said, I don't remember, sadly, because of all the medication that I was on for the pre-eclampsia, I don't remember a lot of the first 24 hours, but we have video of me meeting Nolan for the first time, and every time I watch it, I cry. And so, the first 24 hours was really rough because when you have pre-eclampsia, they only allow you a very, very minimal amount of water for the first 24 hours. So every hour I would save up the amount of water that I was allowed, and I would have like ice chips instead, because I at least felt like I was getting more hydration that way. Because, telling a mom that's trying to breastfeed that she can't drink water is really hard. But we were actually in the hospital for 6 days because my blood pressure was having a really hard time regulating after Nolan's birth. And so, once they stopped the magnesium, I automatically started to feel better. And of course, I remember so much more from all of that. But immediately postpartum, honestly, is like really hazy for me. And that's not something that I like to remember, that the first 24 hours was so hard for me, but that's just the reality of the situation. And then luckily, once they stopped the medication, it was a lot better. But yeah, the first 24 hours was really hard, and I was really tired. And like I said, honestly, don't remember a lot of it, unfortunately. But luckily, Nolan was doing okay once I was awake. He had to go to the NICU for a few hours just because I was put under general anesthesia. And, UCSD does not have a general nursery. So until I was awake and put in a room, they had him in the NICU. Obviously, if I was asleep, like they couldn't just put him in a room and do that. But then after that, like he was fine. And UCSD has a program called, I don't know if it's an actual program, but they have a protocol that newborns that are doing okay, they put a sign on your door that says little baby bundle, and that just basically tells them to like check on you more often. So 35 and 36 weekers can stay with mom in the room as long as they're, healthy and doing okay. So he was able to stay with me in the room throughout our entire hospital stay. And just for clarification, so everybody understands, we were there for my medical needs and not Nolan's. So like Nolan was okay. He was a little bit stunted when he was first born because the anesthesia obviously made him very sleepy. So he needed some help breathing, like initially, like when he was first born, but he acclimated pretty quickly. And so that was really good. But yeah, it was a whole process.
And for those 6 days that you were in the hospital, what was it like taking care of him, getting around your birth suite, getting around the hospital? What was that like as a new mom?
So a little bit of a funny story. The first room that they put us in had a step going into the shower. So partway, I don't remember what day. I want to say it was on like day 2 or 3 or something. They had to move us to a different hospital room that didn't have a step going into the shower because the hospital was designed by a hotel architect, and so it was like very fancy. But obviously for someone who uses a wheelchair, a step into the shower wasn't an ideal situation. So luckily, of course, not every room had that, and so they were able to move us. Although I would argue, what postpartum parent, whether you're able-bodied or not, needs a step in the shower like right after you give birth? But I digress. So navigating around my room was fine. The only issue in the first room that we were in was the shower. And so obviously they were able to move us, and like that was rectified. And they were also able to give us a bassinet that was meant for moms with C-sections, that the side of it could like drop down and open. So that was really helpful. But there are some things that I really want to bring up that I think are important, and that is one, when you have a disability. So, of course, I've had cerebral palsy my whole life, but navigating around the room and taking care of my son, like the mom part of my brain that automatically like activated on a whole different level when he was born was like, must care for baby and must figure all these things out, and how I'm going to pick him up and how I'm going to change his diaper and all these things. And there's a lot of practice you can do, but there's only so much practice you can have with like a doll or, something that's like obviously not a living human being. So my brain and my body were like in this mental turmoil because my brain said, must take care of baby, have to figure it out right now. And my body was like, I haven't adapted, I haven't figured it out yet. And so even though I knew like I would figure it out, like that time in the hospital was really, really hard for me because I wanted to figure it out immediately so badly. But, often having cerebral palsy, it takes time to learn and adapt to things. And the mom part of my brain was like, I don't care that you're disabled, figure it out now. And my body was like, but wait, I'm trying to learn. And so I remember like crying on the phone to my mom, like, how long is it going to take me to figure this out? Like, it's really overwhelming. And then on top of that, I had some nurses that were absolutely great and totally understood that I was capable. And then I had other nurses that every time I was holding him would like stand by the side of my bed because they didn't think I was capable. So that plays into it too, like, trying to not really prove, but it almost feels like you're trying to prove that you're capable. and my hormones are all over the place because I just gave birth. So I'm a mess emotionally and trying to figure everything out. And I was getting really frustrated because I wanted so badly to figure everything out. But obviously, you're not going to figure it out immediately. And it was hard because Nolan was born in March of 2019, before the pandemic and before all these things. And I didn't have anybody to turn to. I didn't have a group of disabled moms that could walk me through it. I just felt so isolated because, I had a lot of friends that were parents, but they were all able-bodied. And that's something that I really want to highlight, is I feel like able-bodied people do not go through this like mental struggle of like your body adapting. Like an able-bodied person isn't like, oh, how am I going to pick up a baby? How am I going to change a diaper? How am I going to do this? There's so much more mental work that goes into having a child when you have a disability, because there's so many physical aspects that you have to consider for care that like your average person wouldn't even bat an eye or like think for 2 seconds about. Nobody's like, oh, if I'm able-bodied, how am I going to pick up the baby and carry them from the room? Well, obviously you pick them up and you walk. But if you use a wheelchair, you're like, okay, how am I going to put the baby safely on my lap when they're a newborn and, all like floppy and all over the place? How am I going to safely transport them from room to room? And like I said, I had nobody to like turn to that like hadn't been through this struggle. And so it was really hard. And that's the whole reason that I started Adaptive Parent Project a year after Nolan was born, because I wanted to start sharing my experience as a disabled parent and like connecting with the other disabled parents. But there's so much more. There's so many more factors that go into caring for a child when you have a disability that a lot of other people don't even think about. And that's not to say it's a negative thing. I think it's really great because, often growing up with a disability, you learn to be really adaptive and figure things out and are constantly problem solving. So, we're parents with disabilities are like best set up for this situation because we're used to doing that our whole lives. But there's just a lot that comes into it. And so when we came home from the hospital, well, actually, while I was in the hospital, I was the type of person that was like, I want at-home PT and at-home OT when I get home. I knew to request all these things.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people, and I was actually, someone recommended us for a public health nurse. And I still, to this day, I don't know who recommended us. I think it was a social worker, but nobody told us they were recommending us for the maternal child health program. But that ended up being a huge support because I had a nurse that was coming to our house every couple weeks to like check his weight and see how we're doing. And actually his nurse, Mindy Stewart, ended up moving and leaving that program. And now she's a board member of mine for Adaptive Parent Project. So we have been able to stay connected this whole time. But there's so many factors and so many things that I want people with disabilities that want to be parents to know what to ask for, what's available to you, because nobody's talking about it.
And we're going to talk about her adaptive parenting project on a little bonus episode soon. So stay tuned for that because that is coming in the next couple of weeks. And we will get all into all of her nonprofits and business side of adaptive parenting project. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for listening, and feel free to email me if you have any questions or would like to be featured on the podcast at disabledbirthstories@gmail.com.